And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm really excited today to be joined by Azeem Khan. He is the co-founder of Morph, and we are here to talk about a super important topic, which is, does the world need another L2? Or more importantly, what does it take to grow layer twos on established blockchain ecosystems, and how are different projects differentiating? This is the follow-up to a conversation that Azeem and I had at Blockchain Life in Dubai, one of the most interesting conversations in short form I've ever had in Web3. And so I really want to bring Azeem back. How you doing, my friend? Are you well today?
I am great. First of all, you're too kind. Thank you so much. The event was awesome. You were an amazing moderator. And I'm really happy to be doing this. From the moment you had said that day we should do this, right away, I was like, I need to message him. This will be a great conversation to have.
I appreciate you joining and taking the time. This is something that I think anybody who has an interest in Web3 should take a little bit of time to understand. There are a billion blockchains out there at the moment, and it's
Mhm.
increasingly easy to launch them. But that's not to say that launching new or additional chains or different layers to ecosystems is a bad thing. So we're going to get into that a little bit today. Before we do, this is a LinkedIn Live. So as you're listening in to us now, please do add your comments in the comment section if you have questions for myself or Azeem. Anything you want to know about layer twos, launching blockchains, growing blockchains, please put those in the comments right now, and we'll try and get to the questions as we go through the show. If not, we'll try and get to the comments afterwards. And also give us your GMs. Let us know, where are you coming in from? What projects are you working on? So we can try and tailor the content to you. So let's get started, Azeem. Before we get into Morph, could you just give us a brief introduction to layer twos? What are the different layers of blockchain, and why does that matter at this point in the game?
So to make it as untechnical as possible, right? We're building on top of Ethereum. Ethereum, using their smart contract services, allows for being able to write things into a database that go further than being able to just transfer money back and forth, which is what Bitcoin is. And that adds a lot of fascinating components of what you can do. And the way that I explain it to most people is that we're also accustomed to using AWS and Azure and Google Cloud on the back end of all of the technical products that we use without realizing that we're actually doing that. And the reason that that's actually problematic is because of the people who own the servers. And so Ethereum allows for decentralization of ownership of where that data lives and rewards for the different people who want to add, if you want to call it, compute power to the network to be able to power this decentralized network that's really just a database at the end of the day. The problem is that there's a limitation when it comes to Ethereum itself in just how quickly and how expensive it is to be able to put data into that database through transactions that go on. And so these layer twos were created as a way to be able to make the transactions faster and cheaper so that we can actually get to mass market use of Ethereum as a blockchain. I'm not one of the maxis who believes that Ethereum and L2s on Ethereum are the only way that blockchain succeeds whatsoever. But being that I've been very closely working with the Ethereum space for some time, for me, it just naturally made sense to get into an Ethereum L2.
Got you. A helpful introduction. So layer twos are about scaling and about providing additional functionality to the base chain. Tell us about Morph. So as I said, Morph is a new layer two. Where are you guys in your roadmap, and what's the particular mission or capability you guys are trying to put out there?
So we recently just launched our mainnet about 3 weeks back now at this point. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was a long road to get there. This was initially a project that was created internally within BitGet, which is an exchange based out of Singapore, one of the larger exchanges. This was an idea that they'd been working on since early 2023. I joined the project at the end of 2023. It took close to 2 years to actually bring it to mainnet from the time that they actually started working on it. And it's honestly, it's been interesting. And I'll take a step back. When you think about the idea of launching a successful blockchain, you need to be able to have the idea of users and TVL and liquidity and transactions and everything baked in. And so when you look at the 75, I think right now, live L2s that are on mainnet, many of them raised a bunch of money to figure out how to build that initial distribution in. Whereas L2, made by a centralized exchange and launched by a centralized exchange, is a very interesting prospect in that way. I think the easiest one to explain for most people would be looking at the way that Coinbase and Base work together. And so, in ways, Morph is like a Coinbase and Base relationship, but we're in an even more interesting position because while BitGet works exclusively with Morph on, for the L2s that they would work with, or BitGet Wallet is exclusive to working with us this closely, we are not exclusive to having to work with them. And so we're in a unique position to be able to work with different providers for a handful of things, for a variety of things that we would need. And so it's what makes, in my opinion, more of a really fascinating prospect for the success of what we're looking to do on our roadmap. Currently, we just launched mainnet. And so what we're doing mostly now is just having chats with builders that we think make sense to launch their applications on more.
Got it. And like you said, the exchange to L2 relationship, I think, is a particularly unique one because you start getting into horizontal integration, which a lot of other parts of Web3 don't do quite as well. And that was the kind of interesting part that I observed from our conversation in Dubai is when you start adding those capabilities together, you've got technical and go-to-market capabilities all
Correct.
kind of meshed together, which I think is super powerful. Do you want to do a rerun of that just in terms of, when you have an L2 like Morph and you have a centralized exchange like BitGet, what comes to the party when you bring those things together for
Yeah.
somebody who's looking to build?
So, what I found so fascinating, and when we, originally spoke to investors, was looking at the way that BitGet has a vertically integrated set of companies that end up being helpful to the mission of launching a successful L2. And so, between the centralized exchange itself, which I'm not an expert on how all these spot volumes and derivatives and perps and everything that happen on the exchanges work, between that and then BitGet Wallet, which is the second largest wallet behind MetaMask currently, which even I found to be surprising, they have a collective of over 45 million users, which is a massive amount of people. And those people are globally distributed. And so they're all potential users where, we've chatted with the BitGet team at length about different ways that we want to be able to work with them on being able to drive users through incentives on the exchange itself, but then also through the wallet. And what that also means is helpful distribution for builders on our platform as well. And so looking at just those two prospects in terms of getting that initial distribution that so many blockchains fight for, we were in a great place. Outside of that, there is the $400 million venture fund that is Foresight Ventures. And with that, we already announced a separate $20 million ecosystem fund where they were able to carve out a certain portion, the $20 million from the actual money that they have. And we set up a separate vehicle to be able to invest in projects in the Morph ecosystem. In the early stages, especially before tokens get launched, it's very difficult for projects to be able to do that. But being that Foresight Ventures is a single LP fund backed by BitGet, we were already in a great place. Last year, they purchased the block. So in terms of research and media, now the block keeps, honestly, like, I can't give more journalistic integrity to that team. So it's not one of the situations where they'll just publish whatever we want because we work with them. But the idea that particularly their research team ends up being someone that we get to go to for what's trending, what's important, what's going on, and then having that media side of things is massively beneficial. In the Eastern side, they have Foresight News, which is a credible news organization in the East for what's going on in crypto. And they last year also, I think it was late last year, purchased a really large stake in OSL. And OSL is one of the two regulated crypto exchanges out of Hong Kong, along with Hashkey. And so if you think about the idea that right now, Hong Kong and Singapore are two of the places where regulations are best situated, and that BitGet has, through OSL and the exchange itself, allows for full, easily regulatory compliant ways of working in crypto. It was just something I looked at and I said, and then adding to the idea that we have another exchange and they've purchased other smaller exchanges in places like Turkey, it was just like, this is the perfect situation for us to actually successfully, or as best as possible, successfully launch in L2, because so much of those initial pieces that are needed are already there for us to be able to utilize.
And there's the story. For those who weren't paying attention, maybe I'll run it back, because this was the bit where it started to click for me. And having worked in blockchain for 8 years, you sometimes don't notice the nuances, or you sometimes don't notice the acquisitions or the connections between certain parts of our ecosystem. And this is one that's about as clear as it could possibly get. If you're a builder, if you're trying to launch a decentralized application, or even trying to launch a chain in 2024, there's a small number of things that you need. Right? You need customers, you need marketing, you need a distribution channel if you have a token, and you need capital. And what you've just described there is, as you described, a vertically integrated full stack of all of the basic capabilities that, if you're interested to build or launch something in Web3, if you're interested to launch it decentralized on Ethereum, those are the things that you get. So you get the ability, obviously pending appropriate due diligence, but at least you have a single face to market, or an integrated face to market, that says, okay, I can get to an exchange. I have a wallet that I can integrate that allows me to then, integrate the wallet functionality with whatever smart contracts or whatever functionality I'm building, such that at least there are some users that can use it. That exchange and wallet has a distribution platform, right? You have the ability to send newsletters, to put banner ads, to put content through the exchange and the wallet. So you have an ability to reach the however many millions of customers. You say 50 million customers that sat on that is.
To 50.
That are using those products today, which is not a small amount of customers in Web3, frankly speaking. You have access to capital. So saying, I want to raise, or I want to be able to, build out my roadmap. I don't have all of that today. So you have an access to that at the same time. And then also technical expertise from the layer 2 in terms of developer relations, or helping maybe where an Ethereum foundation would be too big and, too chaotic or too broad to be able to help a builder at a lower level. You might get more intimacy in terms of being able to work specifically with an L1 team. So essentially, you've got pretty much everything, top to tail, that if you started from scratch, you say, this is already in a bow for me to launch and get out to market.
The simplest way I've explained it, even to non-crypto folks, is that if you're looking to create and grow and build a blockchain ecosystem out, you first need to handle the initial distribution side, in terms of making sure that you're not building on a ghost chain. And because if you're on a ghost chain, developers aren't going to want to work there. It means applications they launch have no potential users and money there. And so we're very well situated through just the wallet and the exchange alone to be able to get access to all of those initial distribution platforms and channels that we need. And then after that, if you're a builder, if you think through the builder journey, you're someone who first has to figure out which blockchain you want to build on. And there are so many, like we discussed at this point, right? And EVM, non-EVM, and within each of those categories. But let's say you successfully pick the blockchain you want to work on. You've heard about Morph. You say, this sounds interesting to me. And you get your group of builders together and you pick whichever application it is that you think is valuable to do. Usually the journey entails then being able to build some sort of functional product and then get access to a grant. We offer grants. And from there, where we've actually left off in most of the blockchain ecosystem is we sort of leave it at that. We think we've given out grants, why are they not doing more? And the problem with that is that we've created this incentive alignment for builders that, especially when we decentralized all of the resources away from places like San Francisco, where usually you would go to San Francisco as a Web2 builder, you would have a day job, you would work on your startup in your part-time, and then you would try to take as many coffee meetings as possible to get into Y Combinator or meet some sort of investor who would invest in your company. That's not to say that was an easy prospect of things, but what we've done in this world where I'm sitting in New York and you're in Portugal right now is, as we've decentralized things, we've also decentralized all of the resources that a builder needs. And so these builders are in this position where they get access to a grant, which is really just enough to build a minimum viable product. It's not enough to build, launch, and scale a company. And so they're in a position where they go, I'm just going to go to 10 different foundations. I'm going to get grants from 10 places. I'm going to build the lowest quality product because that's the only way that I can actually achieve any sort of income for myself. We looked at it and we said, well, let's take it multiple steps further. How do you create a turnkey solution for builders to go from ideation through token launch, and a successful one? And you think about those pieces and you go, okay, you've gotten a grant, you've built something out, it's been relatively successful. we'll help you raise venture money. We have our own ecosystem fund, and then a little alpha, as we'll be announcing a coalition soon of different venture funds, not only venture funds that invested in our round, but investors who are interested in the Morph ecosystem, who will be willing to take a look at potentially investing in your project. Let's say you do that. After that, you need to figure out successfully being able to utilize, how do you get in the media? All right. Anyone who's been in this space knows how difficult that is. And then getting access to influencers who are going to want to talk about your project. It's just, whether it's good or bad, it's a very important component of being able to launch a company and launch a token later. So, if you're a builder and you don't have access to understanding how the network of KOLs works, or how media works, or how venture capital works, which are all completely different segments of this space, I think actually years from now, we'll look back and say it was asinine that we expected builders to be able to very well navigate each parts of this journey, because there will be people who will be complete experts on each. Let's say you've done KOLs and media well. Now it's time to figure out how you can navigate being able to get listed on exchanges, so that you don't do some sort of initial DEX offering that messes up your token launch for good, and being able to set up tokenomics that will work. We have the BitGet exchange, but we also launched what was called a centralized exchange coalition that currently has 5 exchanges on the list, but we're having conversations to add more. So now as a builder, you come to us and you go, wait, you can also help me get listed on somewhere between 5 and 10 exchanges for my token. That's amazing, right? As opposed to just even not just BitGet. And this is what when I spoke to earlier, is because we're agnostic to having to not only work with BitGet, it allows us to be able to offer builders more. And then from there, I mean, how many projects have we seen that even if they successfully launch their token, the market makers come like vultures once they see that you're doing well with KOLs, you're doing well with media, you've raised venture money, and they know a token is coming. How do you pick the right market maker? What does it even mean to be able to have a good market maker? And so we're working with a variety of market makers, because we want to make sure projects in the Morph ecosystem are well situated and taken care of. And so for us, so much of this was taking an approach that I don't find myself trying to differentiate nearly as much on the tech. As you can see, we haven't talked about the tech, even though we have great technology, right? Is that I think that we need to differentiate so that builders understand we're here to be able to put them in a position of potential success, and how is it that we're looking to do that for them.
I really like that. And what occurs to me at this moment is that's not the sort of developer experience per se. The developer experience, when you talk about blockchains, is often about your documentation, your tooling, the access to developer relations teams, access to the community who can help debug stuff as you're building. What you're actually talking about here is the founder's experience.
That's it.
Right?
That's
What does it take
exactly
to
it.
launch?
Yeah, and I was at Gitcoin DAO prior to this, and Gitcoin DAO was interesting. My title was head of impact, and so I oversaw BD sales and partnerships for a variety of verticals there. But the most interesting in being able to understand this builder founder journey was overseeing the grants program. And Gitcoin grants has been maybe the most successful grants program to date. And yeah, like distributed over $60 million, where I was able to help raise and distribute a decamillion amount of money during my time there to thousands of projects. And even if you look at those projects, what's fascinating is so many of them are many of the most successful projects in the Ethereum ecosystem were at one point grantees of Gitcoin. Uniswap, Optimism, Yearn, MakerDAO, Bankless, Wallet Connect, POAP. Like there's so many going down the list that were grantees at 1.1 inch. And where that was interesting for me was I got a chance to speak with so many early builders who were people that had raised $200 on Gitcoin grants, nothing more than $200. But then I also got to speak to the founders of the most successful companies in the Ethereum ecosystem who had generated billions of dollars in market cap and FDVs and things like that. And I really got a chance to understand and speak to them about those journeys from the earliest, least mature founders to the most mature. And it really helped inform a lot of how I went about thinking, what is it that we can do that would actually be different?
I really like that. And then the one next step, which we talked about previously, was about actual physical locations and being able to actually put teams on the ground. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is it too early, or can we talk about that on show as well?
We could talk about it. How should I
So,
specifically get into it?
so we talked about being able to actually work with partners to provide office space or work visas or the ability to bring teams together. Because one
Ah,
thing that I've heard about with depends which jurisdiction you talk about, but let's pick Switzerland for example, European nation, but very very good. You see a whole bunch of foundations based there, but some of the
mhm.
challenges are is it's quite difficult to get non-European developer talent based in Switzerland, and so those early stage teams when they're working together, when they're really properly hacking a product, it's quite difficult for them actually to come together and be in a similar space to move faster. And that's another one you're trying to unblock, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I was in Argentina right before going to the UAE, and we were having discussions about what it would take and I was working with the government there. They hosted an event called the Tech Forum, and it was a very small, select group of people, including where I met, the founder of Cardano, Charles Hoskinson. We sat and had a long conversation before he did a keynote presentation. And so I was fortunate because they were very selective in who they invited to come and chat. The president was there, listened to everyone talk, and then gave a talk himself, and understanding, what is it that we can do to be able to help builders. But then after that, I got to the Middle East. We haven't, we're putting the announcement out next week, so I'll keep it a little bit more broad. But the paperwork is signed on it. There is a place within the Middle East, and I'll be a little bit more specific within the UAE, where we've set up a partnership that will make it, and we'll announce this, literally next week, I believe, next week or the week after. Next week's Thanksgiving, so it's going to make it so that builders can get access to visas to be able to work in that country. So that means from anywhere in the world that you are, we're going to be able to help you get set up in a situation to get a visa. Not only that, like you mentioned, difficulty to get access to incorporating your company is so strange. Like if you're a US person, you set up, even if you're not a US person, you set up a Delaware C Corp within the United States, and you're able to do everything that you need to raise money and do everything in a regulatory compliant way. That's not the case in crypto. With this partnership, we'll make it so that we can streamline your access to incorporating your company in the easiest of ways that's fully regulatory compliant. From there, they have partnerships with banks where we can get you access to being able to do just basic banking. Basic banking infrastructure is literally so difficult. Maybe you can raise money using a multi-sig, even if you do, but there's a lot of things in this world you still need to be able to do traditional payments for. And we can help set that up when it comes to banking. And now, what we've also been having conversations with in that country is speaking to the regulatory bodies about what it would look like and what it would take to help make completely compliant token launches happen so that we can streamline you from going, you've set up your company, you've raised money, you've got banking, you can legally live in the area, and now you want to be able to launch a token in a way that is not going to be illegal at all. And we're understanding what it's going to take and what are the timelines and what's the checklist that we're going to need to start looking at from the earliest inceptions so that a builder can then successfully do that token launch as well. Because we didn't mention this, I'm glad you brought it up, is that legal and regulatory, now that we have the new administration coming into the United States, even hopefully we get some changes with Gary Gensler being on his way out, hopefully. And yeah, truly, fingers crossed, right? But we've been in this weird space for so long now. And so it was something that I thought a lot about was how do we help builders even there? Not just raise money, but like let's say you raise money, but you're in a place where you're like, I need to get to a place that, will give me a visa so that I can work there, get access to housing, set my company up, be able to get banking. How do I launch this token legally? Which again, going back to what I was just saying, is that years from now, we're going to look and be like, how in the world did founders navigate all of this? And it's what, in so many ways, that I'm like, how do we help founders better navigate this?
That's super powerful. Again, I've had over the course of this show so many conversations with companies that decided to choose a jurisdiction because they were the most regulatorily stringent, or we chose to set up here because we can actually base the team there, or we set up here just because that's where I live. And then we found
Mhm.
out actually it wasn't a great move, and then we had to move away. A bunch of
Yep.
teams set up in Canada and then had to move to the Cayman Islands because Canada wasn't a favorable environment.
No,
Ethereum, right?
not at
One of
all.
the biggest examples, right? If Ethereum was still in Canada today, it would be the fifth
Yeah.
largest, maybe fourth largest company in the history of Canada,
Yes,
and it
literally.
left.
But Canada doesn't like innovation, though. So many
Yeah,
countries don't like innovation, honestly.
or I mean, you can pick any number of examples where there's a national or company specific immune system to things
Hmm.
changing, things being different, having
Yes.
to re-legislate, having to re-engineer the way systems and bureaucracies work because something breaks the mold.
Yeah,
Some countries are better and faster at that. If you look at Singapore and Hong Kong, right, they have to. They don't have a
they have to.
strong, enormous base
Yeah.
of natural resources or people resources to help prop up the economy. Their entire proposition is innovation. Not entire,
Yeah.
but a very large proportion of it is thus. So they
Yeah.
have wired themselves to be exactly that way. And I think you see similar in the UAE. And Europe and the West has kind of got to catch up on that one.
I
Let's
think
hope the
it's
US
just
does a
a
good job.
I'm the child of immigrants from in the United States. I was born and raised here, but my parents moved here from Pakistan, and they moved here for opportunity, and they achieved the American dream. They moved here with nothing. My dad, when he had first moved here, he worked at Dunkin' Donuts. When I was born, he was a manager at Popeyes, for fried chicken. He was a cab driver. He worked at convenience stores, and I was fortunate to go to some of the best educational institutions the country has to offer. We live in a great neighborhood. So much of what has allowed America to be what America is was being able to utilize the flywheel of innovation. The best and the brightest and the smartest come here. They create companies. Those companies create monetary and financial value. That monetary and financial value is then distributed as the company grows to employees. And it's no wonder that so many of the best IPOs for the last 50, 60, 70 years have come out of the US. So much of what has allowed the US to be in the position that it's in today has been because they allowed innovation to happen here. And that innovation then created opportunity. And it was a flywheel that created even more of it. And what we've seen for years now is that the United States, in many ways, has just been opposed to innovation. And it's been good to see countries like the UAE and what Singapore is doing and Hong Kong is doing and other regulatory places say, you know, if the US doesn't want them, we're happy to. Hopefully though, we see some of that change because it's it's been sad that North America and Western Europe have been so far behind on any of this. There's reasons we could get into for potentials for why, which is not part of this convo, but I'm on the same page as you. I'm truly hoping that we finally get to the place where we're better off. As a U.S. citizen, U.S. resident, when I was starting Morph, I chatted with my very expensive lawyer who told me straight up, point blank, there is no way for me to put you in a position where you will have zero risk. And I said, but I'm not trying to do anything illegal. And he said, the area of how the laws work on this are gray. And so even if you're not actually doing anything illegal, at some point it might be retrospectively seen as you've done something wrong. So as long as you understand that there's nothing you can do to have zero risk, you should follow forward with this. But if you told me you were going to start a pizza place in the country and then a lawyer told you, hey, I'm just letting you know, even if you don't do anything illegal out of this pizza place, that you might get in trouble with the law at some point, you would say, that's ridiculous. But that's the situation here in the US at the moment.
It's a sad state of affairs, but I can already feel the energy shift a little bit. You can feel sort of
Definitely.
the wag me vibes are coming back in, that we're all going to make it. A few of the protocols starting to start building bonds. Some of the US based protocols, particularly if you look at
Yeah.
Cardano, Hedera, Ripple, starting to kind of just come together and say, look, guys, this is our window now to start proactively or start
Yeah.
at least on a level playing field engage in what the next
Yeah.
horizon is. So I'm very positive about that. We'll jump to a quick question because it actually overlaps
Yeah.
exactly with the talking points we were planning to cover, which is, what's
Yep.
your view on too many blockchains? I think the question here from Siva says, when do you think the industry will mature? I think it's more a case of, do you see consolidation? Do you see continued
100%.
proliferation of app chains? Where do you see we end up?
To be really honest with you, I see part of it is going to be abstracted away. I think so much of like too many L2s and too many app chains, part of it is that we haven't been able to abstract away the crypto part of what we're doing. And so I think on the back end, even if there's 1,000 app chains and 1,000 L2s, none of the users should have to understand or know that. I think the friction that comes with the lack of interoperability and even just looking at, I don't know, USDC across the different chains and how there's different forms of USDC, it's just too difficult at the moment. So I think a large part of this is that the technology needs to mature more in terms of UI, UX to remove some of the friction so that we can get to the place that the way my mother uses her iPad, where I handed her an iPad years ago and now it's her favorite device. And I didn't have to get into here, you have to set up your wallet and make sure you have your secret key. And once you do that, you have to add the network of this to your wallet so that if you want to swap between Arbitrum and Base, that you're able to do it. But each of them have their own versions of each kind of token on there. So if you see it, if you're on the Arbitrum thing and someone sends you money on Base, don't worry, the money is there. It's just showing you zero on the art. Like, it makes no sense. Secondly, I definitely believe that consolidation also needs to and will occur. Part of the thesis behind Morph was, how do we make it so that there is distribution there and it's not a ghost chain? And if it's not a ghost chain, app developers will build things on top of Morph, and then those things will pay transaction fees and use block space that make the blockchain itself in ways profitable outside of just looking at utilizing the token. I think what we've seen for the most part, it's sort of one of my hot takes, is that most of the L2s these days are just new versions of ICOs. And for anyone who's aware, ICOs were just a way to be able to launch companies, well, not launch companies, launch tokens back during the 2017 crypto era. And most of them were really just scams. And these days, it's become easy enough to launch new blockchain networks in a way where you raise some money, you set up the infrastructure needed, you spend a bunch of your money on marketing, you don't actually do anything innovative, you're not looking to do anything innovative, and you launch the chain, you get the token out there, people in shady ways are able to sell locked tokens to OTC, and once you do that, all of the key people run away having made a bunch of money, and it just sort of ends. I think we'll see, for the most part, a ton of these blockchains sort of just become speculative tokens, sort of like unregulated penny stocks. And then what I find likely is going to be that, similar to telecom companies that are distributed across the globe, there's going to be different blockchains that end up succeeding in different places. And so the way that when you're in the US, you use Verizon and AT&T, and then you fly to the UK and you use Vodafone, I think that there's going to be something along those lines where we have different regionally successful blockchains that people end up using. And then there's going to be regionally successful applications built on top of those blockchains.
There we go. It's a good vision, and I don't disagree with you at all. Rima's just piped in here. There's an AI tool already that now actually lets you create tokens. I mean, honestly speaking, the ability to create chains, launch app chains, and so on at this point in time, it is becoming easier. And ultimately, what you're trying to enable also is that projects can launch easily, but can also scale more easily.
Yeah.
And so I think we're getting to a place where we'll probably see more chains before we'll see consolidation, because we're actually making it easier. We're breaking down those silos of scaling. But in reality, we probably see more quality get to scale because it becomes easier for those projects that have a genuine reason to get to market become more easy to observe being successful, as opposed to maybe there's some opacity in the way that we think about, or the way that we analyze chains, as you said, based on marketing or based on vibes, as opposed to actually hard metrics, actual usage, transparency reports that come out of exchanges, etc. So last question, we'll close it here. What happens next? So you mentioned mainnet launch. Congratulations for that. You mentioned there's an announcement coming after Thanksgiving, which we won't go into more detail on today, but thank you for the alpha. What's next for Morph before we close?
Honestly, I just want us to start realizing our vision is, like, we've said that we're going to be able to use our resources to make projects successful. And so I'm doing things that don't scale in order to scale, which is I'm having a lot of one-on-one conversations with founders and looking to see, how do we start picking the select few that we can put through this system? Because in my opinion, being able to do technical differentiation and marketing differentiation and hosting the biggest parties at all of the biggest crypto events is one thing. But what I'm looking for is that we step away from that and we show builders who become successful from Argentina, from Vietnam, from Ghana, from Germany, from New York, that are able to successfully build, launch, and scale companies on top of the Morph ecosystem. And those people become the best evangelists for why you should build on Morph. In my opinion, too many of the infrastructure providers are trying, easiest way to put this, they all want to be Drake and Taylor Swift. They want to host the biggest parties. They want the coolest merch. They want the biggest Twitter followings, all of those things. In my opinion, it's completely backwards to look at it like that, because the job of the infrastructure provider is akin to the job of the record label in that analogy, where your job is to empower creating Drakes and Taylor Swifts. And so, what's next and what happens next is my focus on being able to put us in the position where I can find the Drakes and the Taylor Swifts of the blockchain industry, and we can do development of them by guiding them through the resources that we have so that they become successful. And then my hope is that they're the ones who bring all of the best builders because of the personal stories of triumph that come from that.
There we go. Azeem Khan, the Suge Knight of Web3. Or I mean, pick your record exec of note. I'm not sure how many of them are particularly mentionable or even memorable, and maybe that's another observation in and of itself. But it's a really nice analogy: is that our job as infrastructure providers is to make the dApp users, the dApp developers, or the projects on our chains, they're the heroes. They're the ones who need to succeed. If they succeed, we succeed.
That's exactly it. If they succeed, we succeed. And my job is to figure out who we can give those resources to so that when they succeed, it ends up creating a positive flywheel effect where we become successful. I don't care to be the superstar or the celebrity in this situation, but I would love to be able to see that the work that I'm doing helps create superstars and celebrities around the globe so that one day there's stories of people 20, 30 years from now who can speak similarly to the way I can about how my parents came here and they created something out of nothing, and their families were then able to just do well off of that. And so to me, that would be success.
Love that. Azeem, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring vision, the work you're doing at Morph, and hopefully to all those listening in, one of the most educational and comprehensive guides to how you grow in Web3. Thank you so much. Good luck with the continued mission on mainnet. Good luck with the vision, and stay safe out there.
Thank you so much.